The original Game Boy. It had a monochrome green tinted screen with no backlight, used up 4 AA batteries, and it was a brick of a console. Wait, why was it successful? Let me tell you a little secret. The games. Stop. Chill. Okay, just slow down, editor. Let me tell you about the original Game Boy first. Well, it released in 1989, so this year is 35 years since it released. That's right, we're about the same amount of time from the release of the Game Boy to the Game Boy in 1954, which was the year the first Lord of the Ring books was released. Which means, I don't know. It's just a fact, okay? 1950. Who wrote this script? Oh, right. Anyways, in 1989, the Game Boy released and went on to sell 118 million units, even though it was competing against the Sega GameGear and the Atari Lynx with their fancy color backlit screens and whatnot. And the Game Boy over here with yeah. But it sold 10 times the amount of the GameGear. Because, well, I already told you, the games. Are you paying attention? The initial games released were Tetris and Super Mario Land, which true OGers of the channel know that was the first video on here featuring the Game Boy, hence the channel name. But the biggest games on the system were, of course, Pokemon. Whoa, relax. Slow down, editor, not there yet. Pokemon Red and Blue released in 1996 in Japan, then in 1998 internationally. So in 2 years, it'll be the 30th anniversary of Pokemon, which means Pokemon will be the same time-wise, the same distance now than it was to England winning the World Cup in 1966. Which means, I don't know, but Pokemon was a huge success, becoming the world's biggest franchise in the world to this day. And although the Game Boy's competitors had good games too, they just couldn't compete. The Game Boy cost $89, which would be around $221 in today's money. The GameGear costed $149, which is about $340 today. And the Atari Lynx was initially priced at $179, which was about $440 today. So not only was it cheaper, but the battery life was better too. On Nintendo's website, it states that the original Game Boy had about a 30-hour battery life with those 4 AA batteries, and the Sega GameGear was 3 to 5 hours using 6 AA batteries. And the Atari Lynx used 6 batteries as well, and had similar battery life to the Sega GameGear. A huge difference compared to the Game Boy. Sure, they all had power adapters and whatnot, but just as the base console, the Game Boy competitors were power hungry. The Game Boy had a lot of great games, including Kirby, Metroid, Donkey Kong, Zelda, insert Nintendo franchise here, if you catch my drift. Yes, if you were a Nintendo fan, then maybe you would have been biased towards the Game Boy, myself included. And also, yeah. Now I can go on and state the reason why the original Game Boy was so great, just like the endless amount of videos here on YouTube. But why don't I tell you my own experience and story with the Game Boy, huh? Story time. Here, let me get you some popcorn. The first system I got was this Game Boy. Well, not exactly this one in my hand, but I'll get to that. My cousin gave me this Game Boy, a few games, and a Nintendo 64 carrying case when I was about 5 years old. And for the next 5-ish years, it was my prized possession. Everywhere I went, I took it if I could. He gave me Tetris, a Home Alone 2 game, some Olympics game, Pokemon Red, and this is the exact same copy he gave me, and it's the only one of those games I still have. I put countless hours into Pokemon Red, and my Pokemon team were my friends, and I got my Charizard to level 100 by like the time we get to Saffron City, and he wouldn't listen to me. But anyways, I was playing this Game Boy like in the early 2000s, so it was outdated, and the color had already been out, because I was like 5 in 1999. But I still played it a lot, and unfortunately, I let another cousin I lived with when I was about 6 or 7 play with it for a bit while I went to go take a shower, and when I came back, he had scored a touchdown with it, and the screen lands had blown off, the Game Boy was in pieces, and I was devastated. He was like 3, so he didn't know what he was doing, and so now my Game Boy was no more. And this one that I got here, not so long after that, I was walking home with my aunt and some other cousins. Yes, I have a lot of cousins, okay? Like a whole soccer team roster with reserves included. Anyways, we walked by a yard sale, and my older cousin, who was about 8 or 9 at the time, he wanted, like, I think it was either a Lego Harry Potter set or Star Wars Lego set in the box, and his mom bought it for him, and when we opened it, there was a Game Boy in the box that some kid had put inside, and now his mom had sold it at a yard sale unknowingly. We were all surprised, and when we tried to play it, the battery compartment had like cake stuff in it. And I remember we laughed because we thought some dumb kid had stuffed cake with the batteries in the battery compartment. But in hindsight, that was probably really bad battery corrosion, and the Game Boy had probably been in the box for a long time. They had the Game Boy Color at the time, and a Super Nintendo, So I don't know if my aunt had heard from my mom about what happened to my Game Boy or something, but they ended up giving me that Game Boy, and this is it, all these years later. Of course, I changed the shell on it for a previous video, but it's the same Game Boy. So that's why it means a lot to me, because I had so many memories with it when I was a kid. Okay, go ahead and roll the Game Boy game video clip editor.